Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. So today we'll be introducing y'all this new concept, which is called the ecosystem services. It's very integral with your site planning techniques, and also it becomes important in the fifth year to understand this concept because then you can utilize it. Ecosystem services is nothing but the ecosystems are communities formed by the interaction between the living, wherein you talk about the plants, animals, and the microbes, and the non living organisms in terms of the air, water, mineral, and soil. So, this entire concept believes that the entire ecosystem has the potential to serve mankind. Okay. And you can actually use their services to make sure, your day to day activities or in terms of your build spaces or your cities can work well. So what is an ecosystem services? So as we already mentioned, plant microbes, animals, which are the living organisms. So they are the part of the ecosystem services, which means the pollination, the process of pest and disease management, the freshwater food, fiber, habitat, and genetic resources, recreation and tourism, spiritual health, cultural identity. Then becomes your products, which you can generate or create as placemaking, or in terms of creating social interactions within the city by trying to create more and more recreational and tourism spaces. It also has a possibility of the economics in it, because when you talk about the tourism, first of all, it's natural. It's a natural ecosystem that you are thriving on. And then there is a tourism based industry that also flourishes well, because everyone wants to know that how greener your cities are, or how greener your country is. And because of which, we also, when we choose our vacation plans, we, nowadays there's this new thing when people really want to visit places which are being naturally restored, naturally upgraded, and things like that, or are working on this entire principle of functional landscape, edible landscape, and things like that. Then comes the non living interactions, wherein these are the elements of nature in terms of air, water, mineral, soil. So, erosion prevention is one of them, protection from natural disasters, carbon sequestration and storage, air and water pollution control, nutrient cycling, and soil fertility. So, these, if you remember last time when Meenal was talking about the greenfield site, these becomes very important, because or you're dealing with the contoured site plan, then your erosion prevention, or you're talking about restoring a river, or you're dealing with a site which is abutting the river. And then what happens during the monsoon when the flow of the water is at a very high velocity and the edges are not controlled, or the buffers are not adequately kept. And generally, these buffers ecologically that we talk about are in terms of riparian edges, right? Or you create these kinds of natural mechanisms of swales, which you can then use it as part of your soil surface drain off strategies and things like that. Now, all of these are also techniques to prevent the soil erosion, but also what it does, it enhances the ecosystem within. Like the riparian edge is a very natural edge. Okay, most of the riparian edge will have a retaining wall, or a kind of a decking done by a dry gabion walling. And when you do that, the idea is the soil is any which way is going to get housed in those crevices, because it's a dry rubble packed in this wire mesh, which acts like a retaining wall. And then there is plantation that has been coming on that sloped decking that has been created using these natural materials. And over a period of time, there will be ecosystem that will thrive on it. Carbon sequestration and storage is nothing but absorbing the atmospheric carbon. So last time or earlier, we did mention the example of Bhutan, which is a carbon neutral country, and it can only do it because 60% of it is in forest. And they have been able, whatever development that they have undergone, whatever globalization that have undergone, they have made sure that the balance between the forest or the green component compared to the built component is being maintained. So, using an ecosystem service based approach can increase agricultural productivity and strengthen the resilience of rural communities and their natural resource base. So, the possibility of these is more in the rural or the peri-urban areas, but definitely using other techniques like, roof gardens and stuff like that. You can also look at possibilities that how you can integrate it within the urban uh, planning or city planning. Uh, the ecosystem contributes to the global agriculture productivity in a variety of ways. So it actually talks about the pollination sector and the pest control services. Now you need to understand that these are the stats which are being, or the data which has been taken from the it's a US data which is there, and it talks about this Costa Rica farms, which is Costa Rica farms, the coffee farms which are there, that the ecosystem services provided by the rainforest. Now there is a certain kind of a pollinator service that happens, and then there is a pest control as well. It means that they eat the coffee borer beetles, so that the coffee plantation is being saved from the pollinator services. So there is a certain kind of a looping, and within that cycle you need to make sure that the cycle is maintained and is in the functioning condition. So it's like a continuous loop which is there. So not a single element of it can actually uh, uh, misplace itself, or can lose its presence. So then these particular species of birds become very important because they are the ones who are going to protect the coffee beans, which is the actually the borer beetles, which are the pollinator services, and they are going to affect the output of the coffee beans. This is another example of the ecosystem services contributing to agricultural productivity can be found in the wetlands. So this is talking about the Barot's floodplain in Zambia, wherein you have a particular percentages of fish for consumption, and there is a national average of so they say that the consumption is 5 into 5x, while as the national average consumption is 1x. Okay, but there is also a fertile land of agriculture, which is the floodplains, and 28,000 hectares of cultivation can happen on that. Okay, which also becomes the part of the 10% of the national floodplain. And it supports 20,500 households because their livelihoods are connected to it. And also in terms of their day-to-day living, in terms of food, it's been dependent on that. So the below thing, it actually is a cross section along the wetland, which talks about the rain-fed village gardens. It talks about the drained seepage gardens, the seepage gardens again. Then there is a riverbank garden, lagoon gardens, and raised gardens, which are there. And every time if you see, the profile of the earth is going to change. Okay, and then depending on the seasonal, okay, and the flood level, a particular kind of an agricultural activity can be carried within it. But what it tells you is that not a single time in the year that particular patch of the wetland is not cultivating. So there is a constant cultivation. What you need to understand here is the shift in the cultivation pattern, what crop you would generate or what kind of an yield you want, and and that you have to actually try and understand it with the pattern of the climate. When we say climate, it's basically the flood levels, the flood waters which are there. When they recede, because it's a wetland eventually, right? When the water gushes in and when it mixes with the salt soil and all those kinds of things, we need to keep that in mind. Uh, So agricultural practices can also improve ecosystem services, which leads to a win-win scenario. So the crop rotation, as I told you, that you need to understand what are the different kinds of crop rotations can you do. So it also says, if you have ever discussed agriculture or read about it, it will tell you that particular soil has its own capacity, okay, to take an yield. It can take one crop, two crop, three crop, four crop, depending on the composition of the soil. And also, if you understand the traditional farming technique, they will always change the crop. It's not the same crop, they keep it. And then they have their own traditional ways of, burning the soil and making sure that the nutrients are restored. And then they go for the next crop. So the crop rotation is something that is necessary. And then there are these lady beetles who feeds on the aphids in nearby cotton fields. So then there is also a correlation. So eventually it is a larger ecosystem. So every time you are focusing on one ecosystem, it is part of a larger ecosystem that is being thriving. So your neighborhood, your immediate context also becomes very important. Like for example, within your thesis, if you are working with an agricultural or greenfield site and you do have agricultural lands around your project, so there is going to be a possibility wherein you will have to check what kind of function that particular land has, or what kind of crops it has, because there would be a certain kind of a biodiversity that it will attract, and it might create a trouble for you. Like for example, right now I'm working on this project which is at Ecole Village. It's somewhere around 1.5 hours drive from Lonavala, and it's on the hillock, and we are trying to create a glamping site there. The major creepy crawlies are going to be there definitely, because the idea of the camping, all that it's an open idea and everyone knows that they are going to be surrounded by creepy crawlies in the night and stuff like that. But the amount of rodents that attack you in the night is something that we are being grappling with, and trying to actually work with the biodiversity experts to check what are the natural ways of keeping them away, and what is it that we can do eventually to make sure that how that entire site plan can work the way we want to figure it out. So it also talks about, here in this picture on the right hand side, it actually talks about the savings, like how much money is being saved by the farmers in pesticides. And also pesticides are not good, right? They are going to generate a certain kind of a pollution within the soil and and that entire environment as well. For every year, lady beetles per 100 plants. So that is the amount of savings that you do. Then in terms of attracting the pollinators, in another way to increase the agricultural productivity is also, so not every time they are going to be threat to your site. You should also be in a position to understand how they can act as a kind of a positive aspect within your site, or you are able to convert that converting is something which becomes very important, especially when you're working with ecology and a greenfield site or a nature or in a kind of a biodiversity site, which is very sensitive, and each and every aspect has to be taken care of. So here they talk about the selected shade trees which are there. Then there is a coffee, and then there's a cardamom which is being cultivated. And then throughout the year, it talks about that you start with coffee in the March. Then there are selected shade trees which appear in the April, but most of the time it's the cardamom that takes up, like from May to October. And then again they are only about trees, so you're actually doing two crop rotations and with a gap, if you see. So April is something which gives like a breathing pattern, and then again there are these 4 months which are there. So maybe most of y'all must be thinking how it is related to architects. If you remember the Stephen Hall's project, and the entire the osmosis that entire project that he created and converted into a public park, he had to understand each and every aspect of it, and then only he was being able to plant certain particular species of plants or trees around the swales, so that it creates that whether it's a simple thing like change in the color of the flower, or what kind of appearance these trees or plants have. So it does become part of our role as well as architects, because these actually landscape anchors are building very well. It's not only the foreground or the background, but it also has completely changed the aspect in terms of how landscape can really along with the, if you understand the ecosystem services, and if you can potentialize on that idea and really try and work your landscape around your building accordingly, it can really be a wonderful experience. Attracting pollinators in another way is to increase the agricultural productivity again in the more diverse ecosystem, while supporting the healthy and more diverse ecosystem, which talks about that the diverse farms increase pollinators diversity. So bird visits red flowers with long narrow tubes and lots of nectar. So the bee proboscis lengthen affects foraging sizes. And then there is this kind of a bumblebee buzz frequency used to encourage tomato pollen in greenhouses. So this is the kind of connection, that entire activity. It's like that, the Casper machine, wherein you just trigger one point and then it keeps giving triggers to the other, and then there are certain kind of actions that keep happening, and then there is this entire kind of smooth chain system that you can see, and everyone is feeding on the other action. And then there is definitely a kind of an ecosystem, which is because everyone is working in with synchrony with each other, and then there are synergies that are formed. This is another example which actually talks about how does green or the ecosystem services can be used. Like the first is basically the biomass binds, which is CO2, which is a part kind of a carbon sequestration that you're talking about. The plant reduces the smog and ground level ozone. Then the nature in the cities strengthens the surrounding ecosystem. It also imbibes a lot of values. There is a certain kind of a cultural value to it as well, which has been over a period of time either been neglected or it's completely been washed out. And these also help communities to strengthen or ground them well. Okay. And that's why it becomes very important to look at this kind of a nature culture relationship, or even nature culture and the human being. What kind of a relationship do we have? Then the vegetation captures the nutrient releases which are there. The plants and water reduce and regulate city temperatures. Your urban heat island effect is something that can be taken care of. So your whole idea about water sensitive in terms of, that we saw in terms of your urban design, you could also be temperature sensitive in terms of, and when you're talking about the urban heat island effect, how do you reduce your core city temperatures? What are the kind of mitigation strategies that you can adopt? And make them a part of your planning exercise so that you ensure that there is a certain kind of a curve. Like for example, in terms of the policies, if you look at London, they do have a very heavy taxation which is being levied onto the card the persons who are been using private transport. Now they are being able to do that because the public transport is at a very good state. Okay. And they also have a connectivity in terms of the last mile connectivity, wherein each neighborhood, or you can access the bus stop. Definitely there are certain timings as you move away from the central zone, but it has been accessible. Vis-a-vis a country or a city which doesn't have a good public transport, you can't levy that kind of a policy. But if you look at Mumbai's public transport is also very good. Okay. Right now with the COVID there is a certain kind of a restriction, but other than that, our railways are being known for very efficient kind of a system, and so as the bus, and then we have rickshaws which also helps us to have the last mile connectivity. Then comes the green areas increase the surrounding or the real estate values. So you actually look at your green infrastructure as a capital. Okay, you do ensure that more and more of these kinds of uh, uh, what do you say, built forms that you create will increase your land value, and they are not looked as a threat to the land value. Then comes the foliage reduces the noise. Simple example is like the parks which are there, like the entire housing that is um, facing the Hyde Park in London is at a very premium state. Similarly, you have like if, for example, if you go to the Worli ceiling, and you say the Worli, the land value facing the sea is going to be much more higher. So similarly, even green infrastructure has the potential of it. It's just that how do we uh, try and create. I remember last in one of the exchanges last year, last to last year, when I went to Malaysia, they have actually created the Cyberjaya and Putrajaya city, which are actually for the work home culture people, wherein people who are being interested in working from home completely, and they have created their homes in such a way that each of the housing colonies has this kind of a very thick, dense, heavy foliage, like a forest kind of a podium. Okay. And then there are these workstations which are being propping out. Maybe sometime I show you that project. It's quite interesting. And then they have a 24-hour library which has been running across. Like 24 hours round the 365 days, and anyone can access the library at any time of the day. So there is such a flexibility in terms of the working hours, because most of the people who have been working are working with the outside countries, and then they have to do the match the timings. So then that flexibility is required in terms of the infrastructure and the amenities. Otherwise, no one will get access to use them. Otherwise, so there is a rapid kind of a change that has been happening in the way we live, in the way we try and engage with the spaces at what time of the day. Okay, and what duration. Then comes your green roofs and walls to protect against the UV radiations. Uh, Then you have vegetation that reduces flooding, as well as heat and cooling buildings. So, which means eventually, if your ambient outdoor temperature is going to be lesser, and if you have used a certain kind of passive design technique in your designs, definitely the cooling loads or the heating loads within the building are going to be lessened. And when those are lessened, there is a certain kind of a contribution in terms of less carbon emissions that happens. So, again, it's, if you understand, it's kind of a cyclic loop. This is a global landscape connectivity project, which is actually a biodiversity hotspots. It marks the protected areas as per the IUCN categories. Then there are existing corridors. Okay, when we talk about existing corridors, those are nothing but it's our ecological corridors. We mean to say. Then IUCN is nothing but an international union for conservation of nature, and it's the connectivity conservation proposal, which are the other ones. So if you actually span across the globe, you can see there is a certain kinds of connectivity or certain, sorry, interdependency within the ecosystems as well. Okay, the whole what are migratory birds and how do they migrate? If you take the example of Miti still experiences few migratory birds coming over. It has been reduced over a period of time, but there is an ecosystem which has thrived for several years. And that it also tells you that the nature has the energy or potential or power to re-restore itself if given the time and given the enough kind of an natural infrastructure to revive those. And that's why it has the immense potential to get back its own to its original composition in terms of its pristine state. So this is just an enlarged one which talks about, we have the sacred Himalayas, then we do have a certain kind of biodiversity that you see above here in Gujarat, and then there are a lot of pockets in between which are there. Then there is this biodiversity hotspot, if you see, along this entire left side of the, where Mumbai is, and right from the western coast down. So that entire thing has a very high range as well. And then there are multiple ones, definitely. And then there are these sacred Himalayas, which are there. Uh, so these kinds of maps becomes very important to you, especially in the sites when when you're talking about bioreserves, then you're dealing with bioreserves and forests, lands and things like that. So, supporting ecosystem services, how do you go ahead with it? In terms of the biodiversity, you first identify. So, you identify the area, whether it's, what areas have high biodiversity, what areas are threatened in, whether it's a long term or a short term, what kind of key species. So, you mark the indicators, which are the ones which are threatened. And, what is it as per the municipality or the planning of the area, what are being marked as threatened species, and you look at the functional uh, groups are important for the ecosystem services in that area. Then there are various kinds of documentation tools which are there. You can actually do like a city biodiversity index. There is a biotope area factor for the public. Then there is different kinds of other factors, which there is GIS which can also talk about it, sorry, give you the data. And then there is an implementation. Now implementation is also always going to be in two parts. One is your master plan and then is your detailed plan. Master plan which give you more in terms of the zoning, or you define the areas and in-depth nature inventory, which will tell you why those zones are in that particular place or why there are certain kind of restrictions. And then it comes in terms of the detailed planning, wherein you talk about the public access. So whenever you're dealing with an eco-sensitive site or a green field, your carrying capacities become very important. Okay, which is to do with your footfall, because that directly impacts the well-being of the biodiversity or the well-being of the organic or the living creatures on that particular set of parcel of land. So then your carrying capacity becomes very important, especially when you see all these are going to be tourist attractions. Okay. And when it comes to tourist attractions, you want more and more footfall because that has direct connection to your economics. But eventually, to make sure they thrive well, you need to curb down your footfall. Otherwise, you're going to be maintaining more or reducing your, reducing your wealth in terms of the biodiversity wealth. I mean here, and then you're trying to, more and more give access to people. So these are various, support ecosystems. Similarly, you have valuable habitats, you have ecological interactions, then you have the soil, and each of them what to identify, how to identify, and what are the different kinds of documentation tools and are there, available, which can give you. Water related, you can actually go on to India Water Portal, which is there, okay. And you will get a lot of data regarding the rivers or the water ecologies in India. Uh, this is regarding another thing which talks about regulating. So first we were talking about supporting the ecosystem. How do you regulate the ecosystems? Okay, regulating, sorry, not how do you regulate the ecosystem, but how do ecosystems help you in regulating? Wherein the improvement of the air quality, the noise control, the stormwater management, protection against extreme weathers, and the pollination. Then when you are trying to, like, for example, if you take stormwater management, this the municipality have combined or separate systems for the stormwater and the sewage water becomes a very important question, because depending on that your strategies are going to be dependent. If they are all together, which means you are mixing your sewage water even with your storm water, which is in a much more better condition or a purer form compared to your sewage, and then you are actually wasting a very valuable resource, especially when we are talking about water stresses, and certain cities going without, like for example, Chennai just went out of water last year. So, that these kinds of phenomena do occur. Then can stormwater be led to ponds, wetlands? Do more ponds, wetlands needs to be constructed? So these are the questions that you start identifying. It's also understanding the data, collating the data, and understanding the gaps within the systems which are there. Sometimes what happens, there are certain kinds of wells or ponds, and there must be a traditional system, but because of an insensitive city or urbanization approach, it has got defunct over a period of time. So is there a way to revive it? Not every time you need to reinvent the wheel. So how do you go ahead with it? So understanding your field or understanding your site becomes very important. And that's why monitoring the site, sometimes it's also important. Especially, so most of us who are, most of the practicing architects, generally, if they are working with a very steep slopes or those kinds of sites, will definitely visit the site in the monsoon just to understand what are the patterns of the streams, or what are the patterns in which the surface runoff happens. Is there any certain kind of collection of water that happens on the site? And if it happens, then can you capitalize it and convert it into a reservoir for the site for the future when it gets developed, so that you utilize that natural water for your own site usage and things like that. Then is your documentation tools again. There are different kinds of surveys which are there. There are topographical surveys. So in India, you have something which is called Bhuvan 3D. You can actually go and try. They have hydrology maps, they have geological maps. They'll give you the soil conditions across. They'll also give you the demographics. Few of the states are being studied in detail, and there is a certain kind of a data set which is available. If you're lucky enough, and those are the ones, you can actually get the data uh, uh, easily from there. And most of them people actually use it for the uh, GIS mapping. And then is the implementation, wherein you identify the suitable surfaces for water, stormwater wetlands. You identify the areas of public land where wetlands can be built. Okay, so you definitely go back to your DP, you study the DP and try and understand what are the reserves or what are the planning that has been done. And then you indicate it on the map and then get going with your, entire municipal infrastructure agency, and then try about how the blue infrastructure of the city can be improved. Then comes provisioning ecosystem services. When people are asked to identify a service provided by nature, most of us think about the fruits, the food, the vegetables, trees, fish, livestock which are available. Yeah. A provisioning service is any type of a benefit that you give the people, which can be extracted from the nature, along with water, the food or timber, your natural gas, your wood. So whatever is naturally available, or basically a fossil fuel, okay, and also in terms of your water and the food production. So, for example, if you understand in terms of the materials, for say, so how are the municipally owned forests managed? So the discussion about the afforestation or cutting off timber or reducing the forest is, it's also bad, right? So most of these countries have actually and their municipal corporations have actually adopted the entire forest, okay? And that's why in any kind of energy efficiency or any kind of a green building that you go, it will always ask or it will always mention that the timber is being acquired from a with a, forest stewardship council, which is called FSC. Okay, and that certificate is mandatory, because what it does, it totally takes care of the afforestation. So even if there is a cutting of a wood that happens there, they make sure there are X, the same amount, or multiplied by double or triple amount of trees which will be planted, and they will be ready after a particular cycle of the time. So which means that the forest is never going to get go out of wood. Then you in terms of the documentation, how do you understand it? You do create a dialogue with the local craftspeople, because a lot of these communities are being very integral, and they have their own indigenous ways of dealing with nature. And they are actually very wise in terms of how, what is the kind of relationship that they have developed with the nature, because they definitely know that nature is something which is on which they thrive on for their day to day needs. And then there are schools and the landowners, because you talk about it, and then in case you find out that there are certain kinds of activities which are being done, and then you want to restore it, then how do you do it? Like timber is one. The other thing is stone quarries. What happens to those stone quarries when they are abundant? There is this whole, I think 15 years back or something like that, the whole quarry restoration project started, wherein which are being the abandoned lands of the quarry, which then, the water suddenly gets filled in those, because they are a certain kind of a form. We call them as manufactured landscapes. So you have created that landscape because of your action of quarrying. And then there have been instances where the community nearby will fill in the water, and that water is also being used to fill tankers and provide to certain kinds of other neighborhood societies there, or residential complexes around during the time when the water is not available easily. And then there is a whole other cycle that starts. There is also a lot of quarry restoration projects which have then converted into completely recreational parks or biodiversity hotspots. And it all works on the ecosystem services completely. uh, then comes the cultural ecosystem services. As I mentioned, the culture becomes also a very part of it, wherein we interact and alter the nature. The natural world has its turn altered us. Because it has guided our culture, intellectual, and social development by being a constant force present in our lives. And it that's why it becomes very important, especially when we go on the study trip. We do understand and study the cultural aspects, right, of the people, wherever, whichever place that we are visiting in, that what is their everyday life, what is it that, how do they actually work with the nature or with the climate very closely, and how do they make sure that they are comfortable and their day-to-day needs are being met. Then the importance of the ecosystems to the human mind can be traced back to the beginning of the mankind with ancient civilizations, as I told you, like civilizations or communities which thrive on along the river banks. So there is a certain kind of relationship. Like when we went to I don't remember the name, but there was this kind of a community which actually will migrate down the hill, okay, during the winters, because the at the top of the hill where they actually reside. This is in somewhere in Sikkim. Shit, I'm completely blank off with the names. But the downward their neighborhood used to, they used to call it as Khoya. and the above, it was a village up there, and they used to just migrate because down the hill, under the shadow, they used to still were able to do the uh, farming exercise. So they were basically farmers. Okay. And if you see the animals, as well as not all animals, but the animals and the senior citizens couldn't move down the hill because there are no transport system. Everything is like, on your two legs. So you just walk it up the hill and walk down the hill. And they used to store their greens. Okay. There used to be a certain kind of an festival that used to occur just before the onset of the winters, where they had the tradition of one village will actually invite the other village. So imagine the amount of footfall into the village which is there. And then for that village the feast used to happen, and they used to slaughter a lot of goats. Now the goat skin then used to be used to weave the mats just before the onset of the winters. So you basically prepare, and then there are these certain cycles and certain activities which are there. And it is a part of the entire ecosystem. They are the ones which actually fits very well within the ecosystem, unlike us who are more urban, wherein we have forced ourselves within their ecosystems. And then you do, see the imbalance which occurs within the cities. And that's why, the whole idea of the urban floods that have, not idea, but the whole phenomena of urban floods which have developed over a period of time. So this is like, for example, if I take symbolism and spirituality, wherein,
Himaya,
yes,
is that Majuli or Chakrata in
yes, it's
one of the?
Majuli. No, not
Yeah,
Majuli,
Majuli.
Chakrata. Majuli, no, no.
Chakrata,
Majuli
na?
is on
Yeah,
the Brahmaputra. But yes,
yeah,
Majuli can also be
Chakrata.
one of the examples.
Chakrata. Yeah,
The
yeah, yeah.
Chakrata, Chakrata.
Yeah, I think it's
Thanks. Yeah.
Chakrata and Uttarakhand. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
Chakrata. And I don't know, yeah, I just blanked out. I couldn't remember. But
No, no, no.
Khoya
It
is something
happens,
that they
Kim. It
called,
happens. Yeah.
yeah. So Khoya is the village that they used to call downstairs. So they used to have two houses. And even if you see the way the houses were designed, they were completely different. And we had actually taken our hobos there just to measure the temperature difference on the outdoors and indoors. The houses are just very cozy and comfortable. And it's not that they have been burning wood all the time, but the way it's designed, the way the overhangs work, the way the certain kind of, the inbuilt furniture or the materials that you use, the even this kind of a carpet and thickening and the placements of certain things, it just perfect. It's almost a difference of 11 to 12 degrees Celsius between the indoor and the outdoor. Not exaggerated in the winters. Yeah. So here we were talking about symbolism and spirituality, wherein these are the special elements. So it is provincial animals, your flowers, your site, and other species, sites, habitats that are particularly important in the area or the municipality. Municipality they are talking about constantly here is because it is to do with your jurisdiction boundaries, yeah. And their sites be created within the plan area and have a particular cultural religious significance? Are their existing cemeteries or the new ones planned? So then, uh, if you notice, there are different ways of looking at cemeteries as well. People are actually being there are if you look at the uh, again, I forgot the architect, but this is this guy, yeah, urban planner, who has created the cemetery, which becomes like a public. You can actually move across the cemetery. This is in somewhere in Asia, I think in one of our exchange partners, Taiwan. Taiwan. Sandeep, do you recollect by any chance?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm just trying to remember his name. Just
Okay,
give me a
so
minute.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this guy has actually changed the whole idea of the cemetery. You can actually walk up the cemetery, and it's so beautiful. It's never uh, you know it doesn't give you this kind of a scare or kind of an uncomfortable experience when you talk about cemeteries. Otherwise, generally they are so daunting on you that no one.
I think Kim, it must be field office if I'm right.
Yeah, it is field office, right? It is
Field
field
office,
office.
right?
He's
Yeah,
actually the
yeah.
one who won the Pritzker Award, right?
Uh,
Or Rohan said he should won because the way
No, no, no. That's Rohan's wish list that he may
yeah,
win, or
yeah.
Rohan
I
imagines that he will
Yeah,
eventually.
because the way
Yeah.
his projects are and the way he's
Yeah.
converting that entire that peri-urban setup
Yeah.
is quite nice. Okay, yeah, the field office.
Yeah, field office. That's what I mean. Actually, not just the symmetry, but a lot of his projects
Yeah, a lot
in
of
and around Taiwan is worth taking a look for the students.
yes, yeah. So it basically talks about your memories, okay, your association with the person that you have lost, and it is so beautifully curated by an architect that you really want to go and feel. And then there are these certain kinds of pauses, the material that you use, the texture that he has given you. It does, your entire basically you as a person start engaging with the space. It's never that you're just moving through the space without there is a certain kind of engagement, and those engagements are going to be in terms of your emotions. Sometimes you want to touch the material just to feel it. You want to sit on at a particular corner or a spot, and take the breeze over you. All those kinds of things actually talk about how that entire architectural space, okay, you're engaging with or is being able to crack that relationship between the two. Then, okay, in terms of the documentation, definitely you have to do a lot of site visits because sometimes you don't have a certain kind of. So, here, this is basically the document which relates to Sweden, and that's why they have a lot of, they talk about the Swedish Society for Nature Conservation, they talk about the Swedish church and things like that. For us in India, it's going to be multiple. So then site visits and constantly moving and understanding through the site becomes very important. So the monitoring or the documentation exercise that we do during our study trips becomes very important. So most of the time in the study trips we do feel that we are only seeing them for this particular time period, and sometimes you feel the nature of the project is such that you want to understand what happens throughout the year, especially with the seasonal shift. And then these also become very important. Again, in terms of the implementation, you will always have a master plan and a detailed plan for it. So I will just touch upon certain examples of it. Sandeep is going to be taking them in much more detail later, not the same one, but some more of them. So this is the restoring of the V River floodplain. It's actually a resilient design for the Willu Wetland Park in China. So that's the upstream, which is a gray infrastructure that you see, and downstream is basically it's green. Okay, and the red line that you see is basically your site, and that's the fabric. So you can see it's quite dense, and then there are these agricultural patterns which are also there um, around. So still, it is into this kind of a where the development is happening and still not entirely developed. So there is a site before existing earth dikes, deserted floodplains, stormwater ditches, and reclaimed vegetable farms, which you can see. And then this is the project which talks about the uh, four S's, wherein they're talking about, one is basically your safety. You create a resilient flood adaptive landscape. Where do you actually create a floodable park or an adaptive flood management? So you allow the natural forces of the flood to take over the land because eventually it is the floodplain. The idea of the floodplain is to cover, the water is going to cover during this kind of a high tide situation, and the flood is going to occur, and that's why those buffers are very important. It is us, you human beings, have actually got into the floodplains and tried to acquire in the greed of more and more land. Uh, so first is about the safety. So you actually give back to the nature what it is asking for, and even if you don't give it back, it's going to reclaim it back in its own way because eventually it floods. Then is your S2, which is your environment, wherein you purify the wastewater for reuse. So what you do, whatever that comes to your wetland, you treat it. You never just let it out. Okay. So you create a buffer belt of constructed and natural wetlands to collect and purify stormwater runoff from the city, and ultimately reusing treated water for irrigation, aquatic playgrounds, and replenishing the natural riparian wetlands. Okay, so the wetland park becomes your stormwater management and the reuse of the wastewater. So basically the wetland will always have the water because you're also replenishing the water which has been used. The third step is in terms of the ecology, wherein you use the assisting natural recovery process, wherein your ecosystem services becomes very important. So using the existing trees and the wild reed ponds as a foundation, the design applied minor earth shaping and careful replanting of local trees, shrubs, and aquatic plants to restore shelter and habitats for aquatic life, amphibians, and birds. Okay. Then comes your experience, the recreational experience in terms of returning all of the rural lifestyle and the taste of nature. Everyone wants the country lifestyle, right? But everyone also loves the fast-paced city life. And you know that's why you keep moving back and forth, especially during the weekends. You will run away to like a weekend gateway just to get a sense of the country life, and then you come back to your work. So using water as the main theme with a touch of local culture and the design gave nearby residents and park visitors plenty of opportunities to return and experience the restored natural riparian areas. So then you can see how the kids have been accessing the edge. They have been basically looking at the fishes or the turtles which are there in that water. So everything, and it also becomes like an educational tool at the same time. So this is the entire master plan that you can see, which is being created. So you have like tree groves, you have landscaped areas, you have flower fields, you have sandy beaches, wetlands, bottomlands. The dot is the entire project area that we have already seen. Then there is a main dike which is created, the green corridor. There are cycle ways which are there. There are squares, leisure spaces, footpaths, and the Broadway walks which are there. Now, Broadway walks is something which are going to be with minimal intrusion onto the site, because and but they'll just take you along. So it's generally been wooden, or so that's the overall overall view of the entire place. So look at the stark difference between the green and then you have these building blocks that have been coming up on the other side, which are so manicured in terms of there are these rectangular sets which kind of a trees which are being lined up, and it's very like controlled. And this is actually the grassed bank for one in the 5-year floodplain protection. So you'd allow this entire space to flood. This is the broad walkway that I'm talking about, which is elevated. So you can just walk on it. Okay. And this is the kind of a diking that you see on the top side. Okay. And then see how the entire, so these are dry stone, and then how the entire riparian edge has been taken over. So you can see the difference. So which is there. This is the kind of just seatings that they have used, and this entire space floods. Okay, so outside bank and associated level change was utilized to create tiered gathering and leisure spaces, and it's been understood that certain steps or certain the space has been covered with water when the flood happens. So existing earth dikes, then they have lined up with the riparian embankment, where they have first done the rubble edging, and then on it they have created the thing. So this is the image of the park. Now these are the different kinds of, it's the landscapes in terms of the river landscape, the river ecology, the natural wetlands ecology, the oxidation lagoons which are there because you're also treating the wastewater, surface wetlands which are there, and then there are subsurface wetlands. Okay, and all becomes very important, and they are all aligned on this line. Okay. So then there is this industrial water that comes in, there's storm water that comes in, and then entire thing is being treated and then discharged into the WWTP, wastewater treatment plant. This is the closer look of the kids, and then they actually have this path which is very, they've added color, made it colorful in terms of the aesthetic or the appearance. The power of the nature's ability to recover is recreating natural riparian wetlands by the minor earth shaping or return of the local birds after the habitat reconstruction is being done. So there has been constant monitoring that happens on these sites, because the biodiversity experts need to know whether they have restored a certain kind of an engagement which must have lost or reduced, in terms of the migratory birds coming and visiting the place. Wetlands were the best places for exploring nature. It also helps you to create awareness. It also helps you to sensitize young minds, create your youth ambassadors to for the nature ambassadors, I would say, because it becomes very important to first feel and experience nature, and then only there could be an understanding that, in terms of that, you need to, mm, there is a certain kind of an exchange that happens. If you are not going to visit the place or experience the place, or there is no kind of a tangibility to it, then it becomes very difficult for us to make people understand the importance of it. And that is the exact situation that has happened with the rivers of Mumbai. You have never accessed those rivers, you have never seen. The only people who have seen them in this pristine state are now in the age block of senior citizens who very passionately talk about it. But if you ask us or our younger generations, they are not going to passionately talk about it, because there is no exchange. Uh, and whatever visual exchange it has, it's so dirty and filthy that there is just no kind of a you know what you say, an optimistic thought that these things will change. So these kinds of projects are very important for a city, and as well as for the people, especially for your the whole cultural identity of the space as well. Then there are these small dams which are there, which are actually reoxygenating the water from the wetland at the same time. So what happens is, whenever you're dealing with water, you need to make sure there is a certain kind of a flow and a movement in the water. The stagnant water is going to develop a lot of algae in it. Okay, it will also start producing, if the velocity of the water is not maintained at zero point 0.6 meters per second, it's going to convert into waterborne diseases. So you need to make sure that you exactly know these things, which are very important, because otherwise, if it fails, it just creates a negative impact, and then everything falls apart. So you have to be very careful in terms of whenever you're designing or engaging with these kinds of projects. This is the landscape at the night, wherein these are the intertwining bridges symbolizes the integration of water and the local culture. So it's very, very vibrant and very bright, which is there. This is okay. This actually talks about the water reusages, wherein is the annual water reused is 2.4 into 10 raised to 6 metric cube. The total cost that gets reduces post construction records, the rate of satisfaction which are there within the neighborhood and the community or the people. Then the favorite areas. It actually comes within the favorite areas. Then the water treatment through wetlands, how much it reduces the COD, the nitrate, and the total suspended particles and things like that. That's another image, just a beautiful evening sky that you can see, and yeah, that's it. Thank you. Any questions you'll have? So we'll be taking more examples next class, but in case any questions you'll have, anything, or Sandeep, Meenal, you all want to add? Looks
Yeah.
like you have any questions. So.
No, I don't have a question. I have a comment. And that is, guys, Kimaya touched a very important point, and that is, I mean, another way of saying is, I mean, looping the dots, or joining the dots, or we call it as a cross-sectoral kind of a thinking, which I also talked about, system thinking type, where you do one thing, but the impacts are felt in the other fields, kind of a thing, and that's where your so she was talking about agriculture and tourism, but the question is, how does that impact your architecture? Or maybe talking about birds and bees, but then how does that impact your architecture? So if you think on a larger kind of a circle, I mean, if you think holistically, then all these things really impart a great value to. And today, I think in many of the projects, they actually emphasize this, that you come here and you get this kind of greens and all this. I mean that is just advertising, and I'm not saying that is the thing, but overall, that cross sector connection, I guess, is very important for for every architect and for every planner or designer. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Meena.
Thanks, Kimya. Thanks, Minil. I think that was pretty explanatory in its own right. So I have nothing else to add at this stage. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Maybe in the next class, maybe we can talk
Yes.
of more examples of how this can then be kind of, taken further. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll
Yeah.
do
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
Sure. Sure. Do the students have any questions or any